Anxiety can be a sense of uneasiness, distress, and even dread. It's intense and often overwhelming. You can feel like you're suffocating as thoughts flood into your head, and the light at the end of this seems like it's getting further and further away. It's terrifying. When I think of anxiety, I think of every time I've laid on my bedroom floor, feeling the overwhelming weight of existence, and yet I was unable to move. The thought of getting out of this was daunting and impossible. It can feel like such a massive task ahead of you, as if you were standing at the foot of an enormous mountain, with the peak miles and miles away. But with every task, you need to find a place to start. A single step up the mountain, and that step could be to just breathe. Celeste is a difficult platformer with a monumental task at the core of its gameplay: climbing Mount Celeste. You play as Madeline, a wannabe mountain climber armed with her red hair and the challenge to reach the summit. She begins her journey at the foot of the mountain and, gets reminded to climb by a bird? Madeline then encounters an old woman and asks her for directions. The old woman warns Madeline that she may not be equipped to climb the mountain, while laughing in her face. Madeline dismisses her as crazy and continues on her journey. But was the old lady really crazy? Is Madeline ready to climb the mountain? Why was she climbing this mountain anyway? Then, Madeline narrowly escapes death by, learning to dash by the same bird? Text appears on the screen. You can do this. And now the game has truly begun. I'll be honest with you all, Celeste was not the type of game that I thought I would be starting, mostly due to the difficulty. In fact, I tend to stay away from a lot of games because of the difficulty, since I had my rage issues back in the day, which range from raging at that stupid cube of meat because of how many deaths I got in Super Meat Boy, to breaking a controller out of rage for trying to beat Mile High Club on Veteran in Call of Duty Modern Warfare. To this day, I still haven't beat that level or Super Meat Boy. The first time I ever saw Celeste, it was being played by speedrunners. When watching them, I audibly gasped. Holy hell, yeah, there's no way I'm gonna play this game. I mean, look at them. They're insane. So I totally dismissed the game. Then when Celeste got nominated for Game of the Year, I thought, well, maybe I should check it out. When I actually started playing Celeste, I thought I would feel unspeakable amounts of rage, but it felt different. The game was slower than I expected, and I was progressing at my own pace. And sure, there was a ton of deaths, and I may have raged a few times here and there, but it also felt like something was pushing me forward. A strange desire to keep playing. I don't know whether it was the amazing music, the cute art style, the wholesome dialogue, or even the tight gameplay, but there was something within myself that made me want to keep making steps up the mountain. And so I continued on. As Madeline continues her trek up the mountain, we find Theo, an amateur Instapics photographer who's also on his trip up the mountain. But he doesn't want to reach the summit. He just wants to see the sights and definitely take some cool selfies. After meeting Theo, the game felt happier. Here was someone who was living life to the fullest, climbing the mountain just for fun and photos. His optimism was infectious, and his mannerisms? Although dated and pretty ridiculous, put a smile on my face. Each interaction with Theo felt refreshing as he would provide his thoughts and advice to Madeline. These moments provided respite from struggling with levels over and over and over again. But with each coin, there are two sides. Along with Theo's optimism, there comes pessimism in the form of a purple-haired reflection of Madeline, which many have lovingly named Badeline. Throughout the game, you encounter Badeline as she breaks out from her mirror dimension thanks to the power of the mountain. She then wreaks havoc upon Madeline's journey. Madeline constantly seems to reject Badeline as part of her, especially after Badeline begins hunting her with deadly chases and insults Mr. Oshiro's hotel, causing him to transform into a monster and chase Madeline down. Madeline was the personification of every negative quality that Madeline faced in her life. Rage, depression, distrust, worry, self-doubt, loneliness, and more, all bundled up into a purple ball of bad. It is when Madeline causes the gondola to stall and shake that Madeline experiences a bad panic attack, and it's really bad. She begins hyperventilating as her head fills with negative thoughts. All sense of normalcy begins to fade until Theo reminds her to breathe. Just breathe. He then teaches her a breathing technique to imagine a feather in front of her, which helps calm her down, especially after the gondola begins moving again. It was at this moment of the game that it took a whole new shape for me. The Gondola Scene portrayed the feeling of anxiety in a way that resurfaced my past feelings of anxiety that I vowed to bury. It was a scary and surprising feeling to see anxiety portrayed in any form of media, especially video games. It has only ever been a topic that I've dealt with in my life. It's an uncomfortable and isolating experience, and it leaves you feeling alone. So when Theo jumps in to help Madeline, it warmed my heart. Now I was revitalized to continue climbing the mountain, despite how many times I fail. And definitely there were a lot more failures to come. And so I continued on. Shortly after, both Madeline and Theo encounter a mysterious temple. Theo is excited to dive in, but Madeline is still hesitant after the recent events of the gondola. They then are trapped within a giant mirror, and Madeline has an argument with Madeline, where she learns that the temple is magnifying the mountain's power, and that the strange environment comes from her own negative thoughts. But now, thanks to Theo, Madeline is equipped with a feather and sets off to save him while he's stuck in a crystal with all the eyes on him. After the craziness of Chapter 5 and narrowly escaping the temple while carrying Theo, the two of them sit next to a campfire and they start to have a conversation. This point of the game actually felt peaceful, as the pieces began falling into place. Throughout the game, we've learned very little of Madeline's background or why she is even climbing this mountain. And this conversation was a pivotal moment in discovering more about who they are. I mean, isn't that always the case with deep conversations? Sometimes, when you say things out loud, they sound entirely different from what they sounded like in your head. Sometimes, you have to say these things out loud, whatever you've kept in your own head, for your own mental health. And seeing both Madeline and Theo have this deep conversation about Theo's sister, Madeline's depression, and the reason why Madeline is even climbing the mountain felt cathartic. Especially for me. This entire time I've been playing the game, I've been struggling to get to the summit, with failures happening at every level. But one thing I haven't been sure of was, why am I even going through this struggle? Yes, Celeste is a video game, and it would be nice to actually beat the game and reach the summit, but why exactly was Madeline even climbing? And then she explained the reason. To get out of her own head. To get out of her head? I guess I really never thought of it that way. This whole time, climbing the mountain was not the goal. It never was the goal. The goal was just to get out of her head, to stop fixating on every single negative thought, and abandon this depressed, anxious, and overall negative other self, this Madeline, on this journey. As the two of them wrap up their conversation, Madeline then confronts Madeline and declares, "I don't need you anymore." Madeline then berates her for thinking just abandoning her would solve all her problems. She then slices through the feather and sends Madeline back to the bottom of the mountain, effectively starting fresh, with no feather and a long way to go up the mountain. And at the bottom of the mountain, things started to look the clearest that they've ever been. As Madeline talks with the old woman once again, it dawns on her that overcoming her anxiety, her depression, all her negative thoughts, her Madeline, was never going to be possible. There is no leaving this bad part of you behind. How can one leave part of themselves behind? And as Madeline confronts Badeline in a wild chase scene, the chase ends with Madeline accepting Badeline and asking for her help. And together they begin the final trek up the mountain. I titled this video Overcoming Anxiety in Celeste, which is a misnomer. Throughout the game, you see Madeline desperate for wanting a change, to get out of her head, to overcome these feelings of anxiety, depression, self-doubt, and more. She desperately wants to be able to put these feelings behind her, to be forgotten, and in burying these feelings, Madeline decides that she has overcome them. She wins. But that's not really the case. During their chat, Theo asks Madeline to describe what her depression feels like, and she says, "It's like I'm at the bottom of the ocean. I can't see anything in any direction. It's claustrophobic, yet I feel exposed." Throughout my life, I've always described my feelings with depression as a flame inside of me. It's uncomfortable and suffocating. It keeps burning and I can't seem to get any relief or peace, no matter what I try. The thought of overcoming this burning feeling or the submerged feeling that Madeline described seems impossible. And the idea of leaving these feelings behind doesn't seem to fix the problem. If I were to leave this flame behind, it would keep on burning. And if Madeline left the feeling of being at the bottom of the ocean, that bottom, the feelings that it instills, would always still exist. It is only in the final act of the game that Madeline realizes this fact, that overcoming her feelings of anxiety doesn't mean leaving them behind, but to work with them, nurture positive feelings while understanding and working on your negative ones. When asking Badeline for help, Madeline didn't overcome the difficulties that Badeline presented, but she accepted Badeline was part of her, and after, they were able to make it to the summit, together. The journey of climbing Celeste Mountain is a difficult one. Not everyone wants to journey up to the summit. Hell, people don't even want to live on the mountain. But Madeline chooses this challenge for herself. What does climbing a mountain have in common with these feelings that Madeline has felt? Little is known about what Madeline experiences outside of the game, in her normal life, dealing with anxiety, depression, difficulties in her transition, and more. But one thing we can know for sure, what Madeline is dealing with feels impossible to overcome. So much so that climbing a mountain, a full mountain, seemed easier to her. And it was anything but easy. But every monumental task needs to start with a single step, to just breathe. As I sit here at my computer, there's a massive task ahead of me of just writing this video. The first video for the channel, and I keep thinking it has to be absolutely perfect. How could I be okay with putting anything out there when it isn't perfect? But throughout playing Celeste, it's easy to recognize that perfect means different things for everyone. Everyone is on their own journey, and their experiences differ vastly from mine. As Madeline is climbing the summit for her own journey, Theo doesn't want to reach the summit. He's perfectly content with just going on his own journey, at his own comfort. At the end of the game, I don't feel like Theo failed at all, or that he wasn't successful because he didn't reach the summit. So why am I still comparing myself to others who are on their own journeys? When I watched speedruns of Celeste, I thought I could never do that. And, well, no one said I had to. Overcoming anxiety is a strange term. It has different meanings for a lot of different people. Sometimes people need to get out of their own heads to feel like they're overcoming anxiety. Sometimes people need to work on accepting and working with their battle lines to feel like they're overcoming anxiety. And sometimes people just need a little bit of help to feel like they're overcoming anxiety. Whether that's from an amateur Instapics photographer with a feather, an old lady with an irritating laugh, or even as simple as a bird on a random mountain, help can be found anywhere. Now, When I think of anxiety, I don't think of all the times where it was impossible for me to move under the crushing weight of it all. I think of Celeste and this fantastical and frustratingly beautiful story of a girl wanting to climb a mountain.